Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. At least 8 Afghan soldiers have been killed in a Taliban attack near a military base in eastern Nangarhar province. A provincial council official said the suicide bomber detonated an explosive-laden military vehicle in the Shirzad district. The Taliban have claimed responsibility for the blast, saying the security forces suffered heavy casualties. In India, the farmers are observing a day-long hunger strike in protest against the central government's new agricultural laws. The farmer union said their movement will strengthen and the protests will swell in the upcoming days. It comes after the authorities blocked internet in the northern Haryana state following clashes between protesters and police. The United States says dealing with Iran's escalating nuclear crisis is its early priority. Addressing a think tank virtually, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Tehran is moving closer to having enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon. Sullivan's remarks come after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on Iran to comply with the 2015 nuclear deal. The global COVID-19 death toll has crossed 2.2 million, while more than 102 million people have been infected so far. Brazil has registered over 59,000 cases and more than 1,100 deaths in a day, with its fatality toll surging to over 222,000. The United Kingdom has recorded over 1,200 new deaths since yesterday, as its toll has exceeded 104,000. Pakistan has registered over 2,100 new cases and 65 deaths in the last 24 hours as its toll tops 11,600. And in basketball, the Detroit Pistons pulled off an upset 107-92 victory against the Los Angeles Lakers. Blake Griffin, with 23 points, was joined by Wayne Ellington, 20, and Mason Plumlee's 17 in silencing the Lakers. The loss marked Lakers' season low in scoring and their first time losing consecutive games this season. And these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. Let's have the news in detail. At least 8 Afghan soldiers have been killed in a Taliban attack near a military base in eastern Nangarhar province. A provincial council official said the suicide bomber detonated an explosive-laden military vehicle in the Shirzad district. The Taliban have claimed responsibility for the blast, saying the security forces suffered heavy casualties. Meanwhile, the Kabul police said twin blasts killed 1 civilian and wounded 4 others in the capital, and 3 civilians have been killed in a blast in the Kandahar city. Afghanistan has been embroiled in a deadly wave of violence amid ongoing intra-Afghan talks in Doha. Now, the United States says it's taking a hard look at how the Taliban are complying with the Doha peace agreement. The National Security Advisor said the decision on the May 1st deadline of troops withdrawal will be taken after the review. Jake Sullivan said the Taliban's ties with terrorists, reduction of violence and their participation in talks with the Afghan government are being reviewed. The Pentagon have also given similar statements a day earlier. Meanwhile, the Taliban have blamed the Afghan President Ashraf Ghani for hindering peace efforts. Rejecting the allegations, the Afghan president announced that the United States will send a team to Kabul for consultations on the peace process. Now, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization says ISIS militants' movement to Afghanistan is a big threat for the region. SCO Secretary General Vladimir Nurov said these fighters are relocating from Iraq and Syrian conflict zones into the northern Afghanistan territories. Speaking at a webinar, Nurov expressed concern over the worsening security situation in the border regions of Afghanistan. Nurov also warned that terrorists use technology to manage and recruit militants in the country. He praised Islamabad's role in the ongoing peace process while these militants continue to attack Afghanistan and Pakistan. The officials assured the full support of the SCO for lasting peace in the war-torn country. Meanwhile, Pakistan has once again rejected India's claim that Jammu and Kashmir is its integral part. Speaking in the UN General Assembly, Pakistan's delegate said India has no claim on Jammu and Kashmir other than an occupier. Jawad Ali was responding to the Indian delegate's reaction at Pakistani Ambassador Munir Akram's speech, which exposed New Delhi's violations in occupied Kashmir. Jawad Ali said India wants to crush the indigenous Kashmiri struggle for their right to self-determination. He said India is not secular anymore and its minorities are not safe. Meanwhile, in India, the farmers are observing a day-long hunger strike in protest against the central government's new agriculture laws. The farmer union said their movement will strengthen and the protests will swell in the upcoming days. Farmers said the strike is being observed to spread the values of truth and non-violence. Farmers assert the RSS, BJP government and police try to destroy their peaceful movement and break it down eventually. But it has only strengthened the movement, with more and more farmers ready to join the protest venues in the days to come. It comes after the authorities blocked internet in northern Haryana state following clashes between the peaceful protesters and the police. The United States says dealing with Iran's escalating nuclear crisis is its early priority. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said this while addressing a think tank virtually. Sullivan said Tehran is moving closer to having enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon. He said the U.S. aims to establish some of the parameters around the program that have fallen away over the past 2 years.
From our perspective, a critical early priority has to be to deal with what is an escalating nuclear crisis as they move closer and closer to having enough fissile material for a weapon. And we would like to make sure that we reestablish some of the parameters and constraints around their program that have fallen away over the course of the past 2 years.
Well, Sullivan's remarks come after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on Iran to comply with the 2015 nuclear deal. Now, moving on, France says Saudi Arabia and other regional states should be involved in new negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal. French President Emmanuel Macron said this in a press statement. Macron said it's necessary to refrain from repeating the mistakes made while signing the accord in 2015. He said a very short time remains before Iran creates a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has reaffirmed the kingdom's readiness to work with US and European allies on regional challenges. Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan said Riyadh has been notified of the new US administration's willingness to address challenges in the Middle East. Moving on now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a law extending the New START treaty with the United States. Moscow's parliament earlier voted to ratify the extension. In a statement, the Kremlin said the signed legislation extends the nuclear arms control pact by 5 years. It said the agreement was concluded after the exchange of diplomatic notes with the United States. Moscow said the move maintains transparency in bilateral relations and supports global strategic stability. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department says Washington aims to finalize the procedures on the extension by the 5th of February. China's first third-generation nuclear reactor has been put into commercial operation. This makes China one of the leading countries in nuclear technology. The Fuqing No. 5 nuclear power unit has been constructed by the National Nuclear Corporation. The reactor adopted the Hualong-1 technology independently developed by China with more than 30 years of research experience. Project Commissioning Chief Chow Hao said the reactor's design service life is 60 years. The construction of the reactor, involving nearly 200,000 people, kicked off in May 2015. Now, the global death from COVID-19 has crossed 2.2 million with more than 102 million infections. In the last 24 hours, Brazil has registered over 1,100 new deaths and 59,000 cases. More in this report.
In the global fight against the pandemic, rich nations are trying to acquire as many vaccine shots as possible at the expense of developing countries. American drug maker Novavax is set to produce up to 150 million COVID-19 vaccine doses per month, as interim data showed it's shot to be 89% effective. Colombia says it will begin a vaccination campaign in February after reaching deals with Moderna and Sinovac Biotech. Meanwhile, in the U.S., the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has administered nearly 28 million doses of vaccine so far. Top U.S. health expert Dr. Anthony Fauci says the variant circulating globally will become more dominant in the U.S. by spring. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden says Congress needs to take immediate action on its $1.9 trillion COVID relief proposal.
It's not only that people will be badly hurt if we don't pass this package, in terms of increased rate of death, in terms of poverty, a whole range of things. But we will also be hurt long-term economically. We need to make these investments so the economy can grow the remainder of this year and next year.
The European Commission says it is not triggering the safeguard clause to block vaccine exports from the bloc to Northern Ireland after widespread condemnation of the move. However, Brussels has adopted new measures making vaccine exports subject to authorization. Italy has joined France and Switzerland in announcing that Moderna's shipments for February will miss expectations. Meanwhile, France has reported more than 75,000 fatalities since the pandemic began. It is now closing its borders to countries outside the European Union. French officials are expressing anger and disappointment over the vaccine shortages as cases spiral out of control.
On est organisé, on est prêt.
We're mobilized, we're ready to welcome vulnerable people, except that we don't have the vaccines. Here, we're in a fully equipped center, but an empty one. And we're of course angry because for 15 days we've been mobilized to put up the center, to structure it, the supply chain, to follow the extremely rigorous and precise health protocols.
Meanwhile, the WHO has called on the world to use vaccines fairly and effectively to ensure more people can be inoculated. And a team of WHO experts investigating the origins of COVID-19 paid a visit to a hospital in the Chinese city of Wuhan. It was one of the main hospitals treating coronavirus patients in the early stages of the epidemic.
Pakistan Civil Aviation Authority has extended travel restrictions on Category C countries till the 28th of February. The countries include South Africa, the United Kingdom, Brazil, Ireland, Portugal and the Netherlands. The authority says the travellers from these countries will be allowed if the National Command and Operations Centre allows. The restrictions are followed by the increasing number of cases reported in these countries during the second wave of COVID-19. Meanwhile, the Minister of State for Parliamentary Affairs said Pakistan will receive its first tranche of 500,000 vaccines from China on Sunday. The country has recorded another 65 deaths from COVID-19 overnight, raising the toll to 11,623. Now, China has launched the second type frigate for Pakistan Navy at Hudong Chonghua shipyard. Pakistan's naval officials were present at the launching ceremony in Shanghai. Naval Overseer Commodore Asfar Humayun said the induction of new warships will enhance Pakistan's maritime defence and deterrence capabilities. In an interview, Pakistani Naval Chief Admiral Amjad Khan Niazi said the frigates will significantly contribute in maintaining regional peace and security. He said the new type warships will be some of the most technologically advanced platforms of Pakistan's Navy surface fleet. Pakistan Navy has contracted the construction of 4 Type 054 AP frigates from China since 2017, while the first type was launched August 2020. Now, the joint Turkish-Russian monitoring center is starting observing the ceasefire in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. In a statement, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said a Turkish general and 38 personnel will work at the center. After 6 weeks of fighting, Azerbaijan and Armenia signed a Russian brokered ceasefire for the Nagorno-Karabakh in November. The Russian peacekeepers were also deployed to the region under the deal. The region is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but mainly populated by ethnic Armenians. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. Moving on with the news stories. The United Nations envoy to Syria, Geir Pedersen, says the Syrian Constitutional Committee's talks have been a disappointment. He was addressing a press briefing at the end of the 5-day-long talks in Geneva. Pedersen said the talks faltered as Damascus government's co-chair rejected a proposed compromise. Meanwhile, Damascus's representatives to the committee accused the opposition of introducing new preconditions. However, opposition's co-chair said no sustainable political solution can exist without implementation of international resolutions. Pedersen is expected to address the UN Security Council on the 9th of February. Meanwhile, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Prime Minister Sylvester Illunkamba has resigned after the Congolese parliament voted him out. The presidency said on Twitter that Ilunga had taken note of the evolution of the current political situation. A presidency spokesman quoted Ilunga as saying that he had drawn the consequences of the developing political situation. The move will now enable President Felix Tshisekedi to appoint the Prime Minister, supported by a new parliamentary majority. Bangladesh has sent more than 1,400 Rohingya refugees to a remote island in the Bay of Bengal. This comes despite opposition from rights groups concerned about the site's vulnerability to storms and flooding. Bangladesh says the relocation is voluntary and the island has better facilities than the overcrowded camps. But the UN High Commissioner for Refugees says it has not been allowed to evaluate safety conditions on the island. Now, since December, Bangladesh has sent at least 6,700 Rohingya to the Bhasan Char island. The country hosts about 1 million refugees from neighboring Myanmar who live in ramshackle huts. Now, in Italy, President Sergio Mattarella says he believes the collapsed coalition could still be revived. This follows the resignation of Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, who is now acting as a caretaker. Mattarella has asked lower House Speaker Roberto Fico to mediate between the estranged parties and report back. Speaking to the media, he said it is necessary to set up a government as soon as possible. He said Italy was being severely tested by a health, economic and social emergency. Meanwhile, the right-wing opposition has called for early elections to resolve the country's political crisis. Now, China's Xiaomi Corporation has submitted a complaint against the U.S. Defense and Treasury Departments over a ban. It seeks the tech giant's removal from a blacklist of companies with alleged ties to China's military. In the complaint filed in a Washington district court, Xiaomi called the inclusion unlawful and unconstitutional. The company adds the investment restrictions would cause immediate and irreparable harm to Xiaomi. The company said 3 of its top 10 shareholders were U.S. institutional investment groups. The Trump administration added the tech giant to the blacklist in mid-January. The restrictions go into effect on the 5th of March last year. Pakistani philanthropist Bilqis Eidi has been declared the Person of the Decade by an international organization. Eidi had been nominated by Impact Hallmarks along with UN Human Rights Rapporteur Yang-hee Lee. Eidi heads the Bilqis Eidi Foundation, where she has spent over 6 decades serving humanity in need. Her charity has saved thousands of unwanted children at the Eidi homes and centers across the country. She has already received various national and foreign awards, including Hilal-e-Imtiaz and the Lenin Peace Prize. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, a motorcade of over 50 Harley-Davidson bikers, including foreign riders, has arrived in Balochistan's province's coastal city of Gwadar. Riders from Harley-owned groups Islamabad, Lahore and Karachi chapters participated in the rally. The locals warmly welcomed the participants of the rally as they completed a 650-kilometer run in the less than 12 hours. Meanwhile, a contingent of the folk dancers performed on the streets to greet the participants in their own style. Participants will play a cricket match at the newly constructed cricket stadium in Gavadir. Europe bears the brunt of the economic impact in the wake of COVID-19. With 92 million people already in poverty, a UN Special Rapporteur has warned that Europe's poverty figures could peak in autumn 2021. More in this report.
COVID-19 is taking its toll on the world, causing deaths, illnesses, and economic despair. And Europe is no exception. United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, Olivier de Schutter, has warned that millions of people in the EU still live in poverty.
Today, we still have 92 million people in poverty, more than 1/5 of the European population, and even more troublesome, we have a growing number of working poor, people who work but are paid too low wages and thus are at risk of poverty. 20 million workers in the EU, 9% of people who are working poor, and that is extremely problematic.
De Schutter says poverty affects 20% of the European Union's citizens. He said the pandemic has also increased inequalities.
We need more recommendations to have progressive taxation schemes. We need more recommendations to ensure that wages increase in line with productivity gains. We need, in other terms, the European semester framework to become much more social and to have a better balance between the economic and the social in the European governance system.
UN Rapporteur de Schutter is expected to present his final report at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva in June 2021.
Now, an airport for flying cars will thrust the central England city of Coventry into the future later this year. The project is aimed at demonstrating how air taxis will work in urban centres in years to come. Let's find out more about the futuristic airport in this report.
Urban Airport, a British-based startup, has partnered with car giant Hyundai to develop the infrastructure. It will come into play when flying cars take to the skies and transport people and goods around.
With UK government backing and Hyundai Motor Group's backing, we'll be realising the first fully operational urban airport in the world, actually, in Coventry later this year. And that's really exciting because Coventry is a city centre location. So it's a real urban location, and it's well connected by road, pedestrian connectivity, but also rail.
Urban Airport was selected by a government program aimed at developing zero-emission flying and air vehicles. It won a $1.65 million grant to help fund the temporary installation of the airport in Coventry city centre.
And so with government mandates in the UK of carbon net zero by 2050 and in other countries even earlier than that, I think we need to start to accelerate the migration to more sustainable modes of transport. And whilst electric vehicles are coming finally, the infrastructure to support electric vehicles has been lagging, and we're kind of playing catch up.
From November, visitors to Coventry will be able to see what a flying car airport looks like. They will see a passenger-carrying drone and an operational electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicle on the landing pad.
Now, the U.S. administration says it will review its trade deal with China signed in January 2020. Former President Donald Trump signed the Phase 1 trade agreement with Chinese President Xi Jinping, easing a trade war. At a news briefing, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said all national security measures by the former administration are under review. Psaki said Biden administration is focused on approaching relations with Beijing from a position of strength. She said Washington will coordinate and communicate with its allies about how to work with China. The trade deal aimed to boost Beijing's purchases of U.S. agricultural and manufactured goods, but fell far short in 2020. The International Monetary Fund says China's forceful resumption of its economic activities amid pandemic has contributed to growth. It added China's effective containment of the pandemic and central bank liquidity support have also contributed to the growth. IMF's managing director Kristalina Georgieva said For these reasons, China's economy is projected to grow by over 8% in 2021. In an interview, Georgieva noted that China has also contributed to other economies in the world. She said China's exports are bound to boost as the country stays committed to ensuring prosperity for its people. Georgieva added that by the end of 2023, the IMF will increase the shareholding of dynamic economies, including China. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the world. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can always follow us on social media at Indus.News.